A nunatak, from the Inuit word for lone peak, is a small piece of bedrock that protrudes through the surface of an otherwise continuous ice field. The nunatak is, by every measure of glaciological time, the small, stable point in a moving landscape. The ice around it flows. The ice around it accumulates and ablates. The ice around it travels on the centennial scale, miles from where it was when it first formed. The nunatak does not move. The nunatak is part of the underlying mountain that the ice flows over. The nunatak is the only place on a continuous ice field where a structure can be built that will not, by the slow, patient mechanical work of moving ice, be carried somewhere else. The Juneau ice field, which covers approximately 1,500 square miles of southeastern Alaska between the Lynn Canal and the Canadian border, has approximately 40 named nunataks. Most of them are small, less than 50 acres of exposed rock surrounded by hundreds of square miles of ice. Most of them are unmapped, except in the careful technical literature of academic glaciology. Most of them are, by every measure of public geography, unknown to the modern world. A small subset of those nunataks, perhaps 15 of them, have small wooden research huts built on their stable rock surfaces. The huts have been built over the last 79 years by the Juneau Icefield Research Program, a small, careful joint research operation between the University of Alaska Southeast, the Foundation for Glacier and Environmental Research, and a small network of cooperating institutions. The huts have been continuously used by glaciologists, geophysicists, biologists, and student field researchers since the program's founding in 1946. The huts are connected in the field research seasons of June through August by ski-mounted Beach Bonanzas and Cessna 185s flown by a small, careful set of bush pilots out of Juneau. The huts are connected in the off-season by nothing. I'd been alone at one of these huts, a small 14 by 18-foot plywood and canvas structure on a small nunatak that the program designates Station 41, but that the small, careful glaciologist subculture has called Camp 8 since approximately 1968. Since the morning of the 2nd of October, 2025. I have, since that morning, been 102 days alone on a small piece of granite the size of a city block, in the middle of a glacier the size of Rhode Island. I have been completely invisible to the world that has come for that entire time. My name is Naomi Friedlander. I am 33 years old. I had been, until October, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, working on a research project on glacier surface mass balance, under the supervision of Dr. Margaret Kelleher. This is how a small research hut on a small nunatak in the middle of the Juneau icefield, accessible only by ski plane in normal times, became, in the world that has come, the place I am almost certainly going to spend the next 4 months of my life in, regardless of what happens to anyone else. I want to tell you about the hut, because the hut is the thing that has, in nearly 3 months and counting, made every other detail of this account possible. Camp 8 sits on a small, irregular oval of granite, approximately 700 feet long and 300 feet wide, that protrudes about 120 feet above the surrounding glacier surface at the western edge of the Taku Glacier complex. The nunatak is, by the careful work of 79 years of generations of glaciologists who have measured it, slowly emerging. The surrounding ice has been thinning at approximately 2.5 feet per year for the last 50 years, due to the steady ongoing thinning of the Juneau icefield from progressive climate warming. The nunatak is, today, more exposed than it was when the original Camp 8 hut was first built on it in 1968. The hut itself is the third structure to occupy the site. The 1968 original was a small canvas wall tent on a wooden frame. The 1981 second hut was a small unpainted plywood structure. The 2003 third hut, the one I have been living in, is a 14 by 18-foot plywood-walled, foam-insulated, fabric-roofed structure designed to withstand the kind of substantial wind and snow loads that the Juneau icefield's dominant winter weather pattern generates. The hut has, on its western wall, a single propane-fueled stove that doubles as a heater. The hut has, in a small set of insulated boxes against the eastern wall, a substantial supply of pre-positioned food and equipment that the research program rotates annually. I want to put on the page what was in those boxes when I arrived in October, because the contents of those boxes are the central reason I am alive today. The food cache contained, by my own careful inventory of the third day of my isolation, approximately 75 pounds of freeze-dried meals, Mountain House and Backpacker's Pantry brands in the standard 1 pound per day camp ration, approximately 40 pounds of dry pasta and rice, approximately 20 pounds of dried beans and lentils, approximately 15 pounds of nuts and trail mix, approximately 10 pounds of hard cheese, vacuum-sealed, frozen, and shelf-stable in the constant cold, approximately 8 pounds of summer sausage and other cured meat, a substantial supply of instant coffee, instant powdered milk, sugar, salt, dried herbs, dried fruit, and the small, careful set of luxury items that the research program traditionally caches for the morale of researchers who would otherwise be eating freeze-dried beef stroganoff for 6 straight weeks. The total food supply, by my calculation in mid-October at one researcher's careful ration, was approximately 140 days. The propane cache contained 12 full 20-pound tanks. By my calculation in October at conservative use, single burner cooking 3 times a day, the heater running at low setting for 16 hours per day during the cold months, the propane was sufficient for approximately 120 days. The hut had, also, a small 2-way HF radio with a substantial backup battery setup, a small white gas cook stove for backup cooking, a substantial set of Arctic-rated sleeping bags, parkas, mittens, and the small, careful range of clothing that the research program had been quietly accumulating for 3 decades. A small library of approximately 60 books that successive researchers had left over the years. The small, careful tools of glaciological field research, ice axes, crampons, ropes, a probe pole, a sled, a small set of measuring instruments, most of which I have not used, and a small set of personal items that I had brought with me from Fairbanks for the 6-week trip. The hut was, on the morning of the 2nd of October 2025, the most fully equipped and best-stocked place I had ever lived in. The hut was, also, completely invisible from any approach by foot, by air, or by any version of human observation that did not involve a deliberate flight or an organized expedition specifically targeting it. I had been, on that morning, doing the small, careful work of a postdoctoral glaciologist at a remote field site. I had been, also, the only person within 40 miles in any direction. I had been at Camp 8 for 13 days when the world changed. The morning of the 14th of October 2025 was a Tuesday. I had woken at 6 a.m. in the small, careful pattern I had been keeping for 13 days. I had made coffee. I had powered up the small set of remote sensing instruments I had been calibrating for my project. I had been, for approximately 45 minutes, working at the small folding desk against the southern wall of the hut when the satellite phone, a small iridium unit that I had been keeping on the desk and using for daily check-ins with Dr. Kelleher in Fairbanks, rang. It was Dr. Kelleher. She said, "Naomi, are you up? Have you been listening to the radio?" I said, "No. What's happening?" She said, "Naomi, listen to me. Something is happening across the country. Something... Naomi, listen, I've been on the phone with the FAA for 40 minutes. The pilots have been grounded. Every commercial aviation operation in Alaska is being grounded as of approximately 15 minutes ago. The pickup flight on the 18th. Naomi, I do not know if it is going to happen. I do not know what is going to happen." I said, "Margaret, what do you want me to do?" She said, "Naomi, I want you to assume the pickup is not going to happen. I want you to inventory the cache. I want you to plan for staying. I want you to get on the HF and contact the JIRP base radio operator who is at Echo Bench right now and confirm the cache numbers with him. I want you to make a careful inventory and a careful plan. I am going to do everything I can to get you out of there, but Naomi, I want you to plan as if I cannot." I said, "Margaret, are you safe? Is your family safe?" She said, "I'm at the lab. My husband is at home with the kids. We are figuring out what to do." "Naomi, listen to me. You are in the safest place any of us are right now. Stay there. Take care of yourself. I will call you back as soon as I know more." She did not call back. The Iridium phone died on the morning of the 22nd of October after the substantial battery I had left to maintain it had finally drained below its operational minimum. I have not, in the 83 days since, used it. I have, however, made other contact. I will tell you about that. I want to compress because the daily texture of 90-plus days alone in a small plywood hut on a small piece of granite in the middle of an Alaskan ice field is its own slow, careful story. I rationed the food on the calculation Dr. Kelleher had pushed me to make. I am, today, on day 102, with approximately 45 days of food remaining at my current rate. I am going to need to reduce my ration further as I move into late January and February, because I have decided, by the slow, careful work of the last several weeks, that I am going to extend my food supply through to the first week of April, at which point a bush plane that Wally Karkinen's network is trying to coordinate may, by every careful planning he has been doing, be able to land on the spring snow surface and pick me up. I rationed the propane more aggressively than I had originally calculated, after observing that the Juneau icefield winter has been somewhat colder than the climate normal averages in my professional reference materials. I am, today, with approximately 70 days of propane remaining at very conservative use. I have been, since the 3rd week of December, sleeping in my Arctic sleeping bag inside the hut without running the heater overnight and using the heater for only 6 to 8 hours during the day. The hut, with the heater off, drops to approximately 10 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit on the coldest nights. The sleeping bag is rated to 40 below. I am, by every measure of personal physical comfort, cold most of the time. I have melted snow for water. I have, by the small, careful method that all Glacier camp researchers use, kept a substantial pot of snow on the heater whenever it is running and accumulated meltwater in a small set of insulated jugs. I have read every one of the 60 books in the hut at least once. I have read several of them 4 or 5 times. I read, in particular, a copy of Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety that was on the shelf when I arrived, left by the small handwritten note inside the front cover by a researcher named Aaron Sokolsky in the field season of 2009. I read it for the first time in November, and again, slowly, through the long, careful nights of December. I have worked. I have, in the absence of any of the equipment I would need for substantial new field work, focused on the analysis of data I had already collected before the outbreak. I have analyzed on a small laptop I have been running off the hut's solar panels, which give me, in the substantial polar darkness of December, almost no usable charge, but which give me, in the slowly returning light of January, a small, useful trickle, approximately 3 years of accumulated data from my project. I have written, by hand in a set of leather-bound notebooks, the first complete draft of what would have been my postdoctoral monograph on Juneau icefield mass balance. The monograph is, today, approximately 220 pages. I will, in some version of the world that comes, finish it. I will, in some other version, find a way to publish it. I will, in some other version, still, find that the world that has come does not have the same use for academic glaciology that the world that was had, and the monograph will be a small private document for whoever in some unforeseen future reads it. I have, in the meantime, been writing it. I made my first radio contact on the morning of the 3rd of November. The HF radio at Camp 8 had been kept by the Program for Emergency Communications between the icefield camps and the JIRP base at Lemon Creek Glacier in Juneau. The radio was, on the morning of the 2nd of October, programmed to the standard JIRP frequencies, which I had been monitoring during my fieldwork. The radio went silent on the JIRP frequencies on the 18th of October. I spent the second half of October manually scanning the HF bands during the morning and evening propagation windows in the careful way I'd been taught by the radio operator at the JIRP base camp during my pre-field training in May. I picked up, on the morning of the 3rd of November, day 21, a small daily check-in being run by a man named Wally Karkanen, who was 67 years old, who had been a commercial fisherman out of Juneau before his retirement in 2020, and who had been holding together, since the 3rd week of October, a small, careful network of about 22 operators across southeast Alaska, primarily in Juneau, Haines, Skagway, and the small, careful set of remote outposts that had survivors. I joined Wally's network on the second day after I found him. Through Wally's network, by the slow, careful, relayed work of 3 weeks of messages, I confirmed in late November the following things. My parents, Daniel Friedlander, 64, retired urologist, and Susan Friedlander, 62, librarian at the Newton Free Library, are alive at a fortified neighborhood block in Newton, Massachusetts. The block had been organizing since the day before the outbreak because of the small, careful preparation work that several of their neighbors had been doing for years. My parents are, by careful relayed assessment, in relatively good health and good spirits. My older sister Abigail Friedlander, 39, an attorney at a small civil rights nonprofit in San Francisco, is alive at a fortified neighborhood block in the inner Sunset District of San Francisco. Avi is, by careful relayed assessment, doing the small, substantial work of holding together a community of about 45 neighbors who have organized themselves around her block. All 3 of them know that I am alive at Camp 8. All 3 of them have been hearing weekly relayed updates through Wally's network and through a small, careful series of network bridges that the radio community has been building across the country. I have been, by the small grace of 3 months of careful relayed communication, in continuous contact with my family. I am not going anywhere for at least 3 more months. I want to put on the page what that means, because the meaning of those 3 months is the central fact of the rest of this account. The Juneau ice field, in winter, is one of the least accessible places in the United States. There is no road within 40 miles. There is no settlement within 30 miles. The terrain between the ice field and the small, fortified communities around Juneau is, by every measure of winter mountaineering, impassable to a solo traveler with my gear and my experience. The bush pilots that the ice field depends on for transport are, by Wally's network's careful inquiry, all currently grounded, both because of the difficulty of fueling small aircraft in the world that has come, and because of the small, careful absence of any infrastructure to support the flight. Wally's network is working, in the long, careful planning of the last 6 weeks, on a small, careful project of getting a single ski plane back into operation by April, when the small set of surviving Juneau area pilots may, by the slow, careful resumption of small-scale aviation, be able to support a flight. The plan today is for a single bush plane to land on the Fern at Camp 8 in the first week of April, and to fly me out to the JIRP base at Lemon Creek Glacier, from which I can be transported to the Juneau survivor community at the Yawkey Bay neighborhood. The plan is contingent on a great many things going right. I am preparing, in case the plan does not materialize, to extend my food and propane supplies through a second winter at Camp 8. I have been, by the slow, careful work of the last 6 weeks, accepting that possibility. I am, by my own quiet, daily reckoning of the last several weeks, prepared to be at Camp 8 for as long as the place will support me. If you are reading this, if you have, by some long, unspecified chain of events, made your way to the Juneau ice field in the middle of an Alaskan winter, or on the small, careful summer travel windows when the ice field is somewhat accessible by ski plane or by an organized multi-day glacier traverse, and have come to the small, irregular granite oval that the JIRP system designates Station 41, and that the small, careful subculture of icefield researchers has called Camp 8 for 58 years, I want you to know 2 things. The first is that I may still be here. If you arrive between January and early April of 2026, knock at the door, identify yourself, Give me a moment to assess. I will let you in. I will give you a meal, a sleeping bag, a place to sleep. I will share whatever supplies I have. If you have come, by any version of legitimate professional research access on a JIRP-related project, the cash is the cash, and I have been respecting it accordingly. If I am not here when you arrive, if, by some careful turn of events that I cannot today foresee, my long isolation has ended, the cash is yours. The hut is unlocked. The radio works. The HF frequency for Wally Karkkonen's network is written on a small index card pinned to the wall above the radio. If you join the network and tell Wally that Naomi Friedlander sent you, he will know what to do. The second is that the substantial network of remote research huts of the United States and Canadian Arctic, JIRP huts, the Greenland Inland Ice Traverse waypoints, the Mount Logan research camps, the substantial set of small mountaineering and research huts in Wrangell St. Elias, Denali, the North Cascades, the Olympics, and the small high-elevation refugees of the western mountain ranges are, in the world that has come, scattered across some of the most remote landscapes of North America. Most of them are unstaffed in the off-season. Most of them have substantial pre-positioned supplies. Most of them are accessible only by small aircraft or by multi-day expeditions over difficult terrain. Most of them are, by every measure of public knowledge, almost completely unknown. If you are within the kind of organized survival community that has the capacity for long-distance travel, if the small, careful regional networks that are forming across the surviving North American communities have begun to reach out to remote landscapes, the huts are out there. Reach out to the surviving members of the academic field science community. Reach out to the surviving members of the mountaineering community. Reach out to the surviving members of the bush piloting community. The huts are known to those people. The huts can, in the careful planning of small, organized expeditions, become small, careful satellite refugees in the long, careful resettlement of the world that comes after this one. The morning is dim. The sun, which dropped below the southern horizon for several weeks in mid-December, and which has been creeping back above the horizon for about an hour a day since the solstice, is now giving me approximately 7.5 hours of daylight. The light is the small, careful, pale blue that Alaskan winter light is. Not strong enough to read by indoors, but strong enough that I have been able, for about 3 weeks now, to do my morning observations of the small ridge of the Nunatak by daylight rather than by headlamp. I am going to put down the small, leather-bound notebook I have been writing this in. I am going to stand up from the small folding desk where I have been sitting for 2 hours. I am going to put on my parka, my mittens, and my insulated boots. I am going to walk out onto the small piece of granite that has been my entire physical world for 102 days. I am going to look out across approximately 15 miles of frozen ice toward the ridge of mountains that separates the Juneau ice field from the Lynn Canal and the small, fortified communities of Juneau beyond. I am going to listen, in the substantial silence that the ice field in winter produces, for whatever the wind is doing today. In about 3 months, by every careful arrangement Wally Karkkonen's network is making, a small ski plane is going to land on the fern 300 yards from this hut. In about 3 months, I'm going to walk out across that snow with the small set of personal possessions I have been collecting over 102 days, climb into the plane, and fly back into the world. In about 3 months, I will, by every careful arrangement that can be worked out across 2,000 miles of relayed radio messages, see my family again. In the meantime, I'm going to be exactly where I am. The glacier does not care. The glacier has been here for 4,000 years. The glacier will be here in some form for thousands more. I am, in the small, careful way that any human being can be, a small temporary tenant on a small temporary piece of stable rock in the middle of a body of ice that does not, by any measure of geological time, notice me at all. That is, by every measure that matters, enough. Naomi Friedlander, Camp 8, Juneau, Icefield, Southeast Alaska, 12. January 2026, day 102.